All right, thank those for who have just joined us. This is Take Time to Heal Extension. Lift Every Voice, the LEV Project. We're reading and going over these narratives. And I'm just on the line. If you want to call in as well, the number is 857-232-0156, extension 688-286. I'm sorry, I've been remiss in giving that number while I'm on live. It's 857-232-0156, extension 688-286. And right now, feedback is good. And so we're on the line with Sister Angel. And I was asking her how it's going. Because oftentimes in the beginning, we're like, yeah. And I was speaking about that earlier in the video. And then as we go along, we're like, no. And so I kind of wanted to give some feedback. And I was speaking to Sister Angel, but then it was time to log on. And so I wanted to carry over this conversation online for her to share her personal experience of how this has been helping her, as well as what she began to do on her own. So, Sister Angel, if it's okay with you, can you share that again, your experience so far with the LEV project?
Well, thank you very much. I have been exploring for myself some of the things that I haven't been able to handle while reading with what they went through, compared to what I consider myself to be going through this time, and also in how I was raised in Christianity, believing what I did believe, being able to associate more with the stories of the Bible that that showed Christians or people leading by life, and I could associate with those images and have fear in that context when I saw images of slaves hanging from trees or being whipped, or the conditions in which they lived, which I'm sure were worse than what we were shown in pictures. But I couldn't associate with those images because I really didn't identify them. So I'm just acknowledging that reading through this material, I'm having a hard time accepting it because it wasn't something that I could really put myself in the place. So lately I've been listening to more books about slavery and the things that transpired, even some of our stars that we see, our celebrities, the trials that they went through, 1906, remember the Josephine, the trial that she went through dealing with life after slavery.
So you're saying it's opening up your eyes and giving you more of a sensitivity to, like you're saying, the literature. Before it was kind of this distant thought of slavery, but now as you're reading the words of those who left it on record, you're tuning in more to the experience. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes, yes.
And so tell them a little bit about, because a lot of people don't know. I know some people, again, the kickback, you expect us to read all those books. Sister Angel was just sharing that, and I also listen to them online. It's so serious right now. If you go on YouTube, or there's something called a lever box recording. A lot of these narratives are in the collective commons, meaning there's no more copyright on them. They've actually read them aloud for you, so they're audio on tape. So if you really have an interest or desire, and I heard one person commented today, kind of like, like that's gonna help. You understand what I'm saying? For those of us who know who we are and feel that is sufficient, and to think that the testimonies of our foreparents are not important, they think that it's not going to help. But how can you confess, or how can you acknowledge, or how can you heal from something that you don't know? You understand what I'm saying? If you turn to your brother and say, hey, man, why you keep eating so much swine? But when you read in the slave narratives and understand that swine and cornbread was about the only thing that they gave them on a constant to sustain them, now you understand why that is so deeply embedded into the culture and into the consciousness. And this awareness, instead of beating each other over the head, is kind of like sharing. And I'm so glad she renewed my strength today, because it's sharing this story, so that hopefully we will go on our own and begin to listen and begin to learn and begin to grow and widen our scope of not just anything, but the voices of those who came before us, on whose shoulders we stand. Sister Angel, would you like to say anything else before we get started?
No, I have nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to share this along. Feedback is always good. I know it's hard to stomach. Someone, I saw a comment that they said, you know, they read about 3 chapters and couldn't go anymore. And earlier, it came to my spirit, and I did a video concerning that, because the reality is, just like that child who is, not to say we're overreacting. No, the pain is very real. And this is why you're shrieking away from it, because it's still in the spirit, although you will not acknowledge it. So we look outside of ourselves for others to acknowledge what we ourselves are not ready to acknowledge. And so just like your mother cleaning out that cut, or your caretaker saying, be still while I make sure it doesn't get infected, we have to be still and move through the pain or emotions and feelings. They're like rivers or water. It's fluid. And if you stop it, it dams up, and it stays into your body, into your consciousness. Again, sometimes it's funny how the feedback we get when we're not listening, when we're not studying, and when we say we want to know, but we don't want to do the work to know. And again, I've seen some feedback like, oh, that's psychobabble, or it's like we have been so totally cut off from our understanding that we're not only physical beings. You understand what I'm saying? We're emotional beings, we're spiritual beings, and different areas of our oppression or of our captivity affected us on different levels. It's not just, oh, the shackles are off. You understand? It behooves us, if we desire to, I'm talking as I'm trying to send out stuff here, but it behooves us to go into these things and take a look, even if for our own journey. I'm not the one who be like, yeah, come on, we could all do it, and everybody. No, this is for the individual journey first, so that you can get a grip on yourself, and from there be able to help somebody else. You can't help someone else if you have not yet gone through the process. We're being cheerleaders at that point, and then once the cheerleader is no longer there, then it all comes tumbling down. It's all about empowerment. And I'm just really excited and love what the sister said, that it opened up her appetite, and even though it's still painful, it's something that, hey, I'm intrigued. Let me hear more. Let me see what else is going on. Let me see what I can learn. I'm learning a lot. And people, when I hear, oh, I don't have time to read, I'm like, yeah, we be reading social media all day long. You understand what I'm saying? And it's to the point where you can even listen to it being read. I mean, 9 times out of 10, it's somebody of another nation. And that's another thing I found very interesting. When you do listen to these Lever Box recordings, they're Europeans reading it. I thought that, and that's what really pushed me. Like, no, when I listen to, I have the book, but when I listen to it online, and you can look it up on YouTube, and you look for Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, it's a European male reading the text. That one of our foreparents wrote under penalty of punishment to shed light on the very oppressive system, and yet still somebody else saw it more valuable than we did to not only preserve it, because these are testimonies. I've read a number of times in the book I'm reading now, Weebles in the Wheat, that they said, oh, they're thanking the Most High for the ability to give their story, that this story may be told. And we don't even want to stay still and listen. But anyway, let me get off the soapbox here. Let's jump up on this. As we go on, 1 and 2 voices, for me, that's enough to change the course of how we look and view at things. So it's not about the mass numbers, because oftentimes the masses don't come to after. It's about those who are really trying to look and change and understand their own journey and how you fit into this. I'm just very sensitive in this area, because that was me many years ago, and still to this day, to understand my purpose here in life and how it works. And we expect that one person is going to give us all the answers, and that it's not realistic. You go to one person, and if you don't agree with every single thing they say, then I don't like that individual. Not realizing that we are all pieces to the puzzle. So not one individual is going to give you everything you need, because they're not God to you. They're not the Most High. So they can't give you all of the understanding that you're looking for. And we need to, rethink the way we approach one another. and have that conversation where we have our ears and our eyes and our heart open to converse and understand that, yes, this is your journey and we may intersect at this point, but I really don't expect you to have everything that I need. And I don't have everything that you need, because we're all on this journey and we have not completed it. So hopefully, like I said, I'm thankful to hear back that this has been helpful to someone. And we're going to go on to chapter 7 of, I ordered the book because it's in collective commons, so different people are printing it. This particular printer was First Rate Publishers. It's a little bit small, but nonetheless, I don't see any volunteers today. Let me go ahead and check. And I'm definitely looking for the voices of the males, because this story in particular is of Charles Ball, which is a man who went through this system of slavery. So just give me a minute to let me make sure that I didn't get any volunteers. And as we go along, maybe it will pick up. But until then, and I was looking at the benefits. Sorry, there are many benefits to reading aloud. And I guess next time when I come, I'm going to read those benefits because I talked out a little bit today before we got started. But I'm going to read those benefits of reading aloud to ourselves, to one another. It does a lot of things for the mind, and it's very healthy to do this process. So definitely, if you're not reading, please begin to pick back up books and read. And something about the experience of holding. That's why I like getting books as opposed to reading on the internet, because it hurts my eyes. But I like being able to flip pages and mark your space. But anywho, chapter 7. Once again, thank you everybody for joining us. This is Lift Every Voice. My name is Imuna Yisrael. This is the LEV Project. We're reading aloud the narratives of our foreparents. Not that long ago. This was what, 1860s, 65. So it's not that long ago. I'm not sure if it's 1865, but what I'm saying is it's not that long ago, and we have forgotten already. So, chapter 5. The overseer was calling the names of the whole from a little book, and the first name I heard was that of my companion, Lydia. As she did not answer, I said, "Master, the woman that carries her baby on her back will be here in a minute." And I'm going to take me off of this thing as I read here, but you will continue to hear my voice. He paid no attention to what I said, but went on with his call. As the people answered to their names, they passed off to the cabins, except 3, 2 women and a man, who, when their names were called, were ordered to go into the yard in front of the overseer's house. My name was the last on the list, and when it was called, I was ordered into the yard with the 3 others. Just as we had entered, Lydia came up out of breath, with the child in her arms, and following us into the yard, dropped on her knees before the overseer and begged him to forgive her. "Where have you been?" said he. Poor Lydia now burst into tears and said, "I only stopped to talk a while to this man," pointed to me. "But indeed, Master Overseer, I will never do so again." "Lie down," was his reply. Here we go. Lydia immediately fell prostrate upon the ground, and in this position he compelled her to remove her old, torn linen shift, the only garment she wore, so as to expose her hips, when he gave her 10 lashes with his long whip, every touch of which brought blood and a shriek from the sufferer. He then ordered her to go and get her supper, with an injunction never to stay behind again. The other 3 culprits were then put upon their trial. The first was a middle-aged woman who had, as her overseer said, left several hills of cotton in the course of the day, without cleaning and hilling them in a proper manner. She received 12 lashes. The other 2 were charged in general terms, which, having been lazy and having neglected their work that day, each of these received 12 lashes. These people all received punishment in the same manner that it had been inflicted upon Lydia. And when they were all gone, the overseer turned to me and said, "Boy, you are a stranger here yet, but I call you in to let you see how things are done here, and to give you a little advice. When I get a new Negro under my command, I never whip him at first. I always call him to a few days to learn his duty, unless he is an outrageous villain, in which case I anoint him a little at the beginning. I call over the names of all the hands twice every week, on Wednesday and Saturday evenings, and settle with them according to their general conduct for the last 3 days. I call the names of my captains every morning, and it is their business to see that they have all their hands in their proper places. You ought not to have stayed behind tonight with Lyd, but as this is your first offense, I shall overlook it, and you may go and get your supper. I made a low bow and thanked Master Overseer for his kindness to me and left him. This night for supper, we had cornbread and cucumbers, but we had neither salt, vinegar, nor pepper with the cucumbers. I have never been before seen people flog in the way our overseer flogged his people. This plan of making the person who is to be whipped lie down upon the ground was new to me, though it is much practiced in the South, and I have since seen men and women too cut nearly in pieces by this mode of punishment. It has one advantage over tying up by the hands, as it prevents all accidents from sprains in the thumbs or wrists. On Monday morning, I heard the sound of the horn as the usual hour, and repairing to the front of the overseer's house, found that he had already gone to the corn crib for the purpose of distributing corn among the people, for the bread of the week, or rather the week's subsistence. For this corn was all the provision that our master or overseer usually made for us. I say usually, for whatever was given to us beyond the corn, which we received on Sunday evening, was considered in the light of a bounty bestowed upon us, over and beyond that which we were entitled to or had a right to expect to receive. When I arrived at the crib, the door was unlocked and open, and the distribution had already commenced. Each person was entitled to half a bushel of ears of corn, which was measured out by several of men who were in the cribs. Every child about 6 months old drew his weekly allowance, and in this way women who had several children had more corn than they could consume, and sometimes bartered small quantities with the other people for such things as they needed and not able to procure. The people received their corn in baskets, old bags, or anything which they could most conveniently provide themselves. I had not been able since I came here to procure a basket or anything else to put my corn in, and desired the man with whom I lived to take a portion in his basket with that of his family. This he readily agreed to do, and as soon as we received our share, we left the crib. The overseer attended in person to the measure of this corn, and it is only justice to him to say that he was careful to see that justice was done. The men who measured the corn always heaped the measure as long as an ear and would lie on, and he never restrained their generosity to their fellow slaves. In addition to this allowance of corn, we received a weekly allowance of salt, amounting in general to about half a gill to each person. But this article was not furnished regularly, and sometimes we received none for 2 or 3 weeks. The reader must not suppose that on this plantation we had nothing to eat beyond corn and salt. This was far from the case. I have already described the gardens or patches cultivated by the people, and the practice with which they universally followed of working on Sundays for wages. In addition to all these, an industrious managing slave would contrive to gather up a great deal to eat. I have observed that the planters are careful of the health of their slaves, and in pursuance of this rule, they seldom expose them to rainy weather, especially in the sickly seasons of the year, if it can be avoided. In the spring and early parts of the summer, the rains are frequently so violent, and the ground becomes so wet that it is injurious to the cotton to work in, at least while it rains. In the course of the year, there are many of these rainy days in which the people cannot go to work with safety, and it often happens that there is nothing for them to do in the house. At such time, they make baskets, brooms, horse collars, and other things which they are able to sell amongst the planters. The baskets are made of wooden splits and the brooms of young white oak and hickory trees. The mats are sometimes made of splits, but more frequently of flags, as they are called, a kind of tall rush which grows in swampy ground. Where am I? The horse or mule collars are made of husks of corn, though sometimes of rushes, but the latter are not very durable. For those who have just joined us, we are currently reading 50 Years in Chains, chapter 7. The money procured by these and various other means, which I shall explain thereafter, is laid out by the slaves in purchasing such little articles of necessity or luxury as it enables them to procure. A part is distributed in payment for sugar, molasses, and sometimes a few pounds of coffee for the use of the family. Another part is paid out for clothes for winter, and no inconsiderable portion of his pittance is squandered away by the misguiding slave for tobacco and an occasional bottle of rum. Tobacco is deemed so indispensable to comfort, nay, to existence, that hunger and nakedness are patiently endured to enable the slave to indulge in his highest of enjoyment. So they like just smoking. They like smoking then too to release the stress. I'm sorry. There being few towns in the cotton country, the shops or stores are frequently kept at some crossroad or other public place in or adjacent to a rich district of plantation. To these shops the slaves resort, sometimes with and at other times without the consent of the overseer, for the purpose of laying out the little money they get. Notwithstanding all the vigilance that is exercised by the planter, the slaves, who are no less vigilant than their masters, often leave the plantation after the overseer has retired to bed and go to the store. This stuff sounds so familiar. The storekeepers are always ready to accommodate the slaves, who are frequently better customers than many white people. Because the farmers always pay cash, because the former always pays cash, whilst the latter almost always require credit. Let me read that again. Sorry. The storekeepers are always ready to accommodate the slaves, who are frequently better customers than many white people. Because the former always pay cash, whilst the latter almost always require credit. In dealing with the slave, the shopkeeper knows he can demand whatever price he pleases for his good, without danger of being charged with extortion, and he is ready to rise at any time of the night to oblige friends who have so much value to him. It is held highly disgraceful on the part of the shopkeepers to deal with the slaves for anything but money, or the coarse fabrics that it is known are the usual products of the ingenuity and industry of Negroes. But notwithstanding this, a considerable traffic is carried on between the shopkeeper and slaves, in which the latter make their payments by barter. The utmost caution and severity of masters and overseers are sometimes insufficient to repress the cunning contrivances of the slaves. 1 second, please. For those who have just joined us, we are in 50 Years in Chains. This is interesting. If you can see any parallels today between shopkeepers and the descendants of those who would they so favorably look upon as they enter their store in certain urban areas, because they know it equals money and spells money. I just think that's very interesting. I'm gonna take a drink of water and we're gonna get back. All right, for those who have just joined us, I hear another join on the conference call. Welcome. We are well on our way, and we're going to continue reading here as it gets very interesting. After we received our corn, we deposited in our several houses, and immediately followed the overseer to the same cotton field in which we had been at work on Sunday. Our breakfast this morning was bread, to which was added a large basket of apples from the orchard of our master. These apples served us for a relish with our bread, both for breakfast and dinner. And when I returned to the quarter in the evening, Dina, the name of the woman who was at the head of our family, produced a supper, a black jug containing molasses, and gave me some of the molasses for my supper. I felt grateful to Dina for this act of kindness, as I well knew that her children regarded molasses as the greatest of human luxuries. Sorry. And that she was depriving them of the highest enjoyment to afford me the means of making a gourd full of molasses and water. I therefore proposed to her and her husband, whose name was Nero, wow, they named him Nero, that whilst I should remain a member of the family, I would contribute as much towards its support as Nero himself, or at least that I would bring all my earnings into the family stock, provided I might be treated as one of its members and be allowed a portion of proceeds of their patch or garden. This offer was very readily accepted, and from this time we constituted one community, as long as I remained among the field hands of this plantation. After supper was over, we had to grind our corn, but as we had to wait for our turn at the mill, we did not get through this indispensable operation before 1 o'clock in the morning. We did not sit up all night to wait for our turn at the mill, but as our several turns were assigned to us by lot, the person who had the first turn, when done with the mill, gave notice to the one entitled to the second, and so on. By this means, nobody lost more than a half hour's sleep, and in the morning, everyone's grinding was done. We worked very hard this week. We were not laying by the cotton as it is termed. That is, we were giving the last weeding and hilling to the crop, of which there was on this plantation about 500 acres, which looked well and promised to yield a fine picking. 500 acres. In addition to the cotton, there was one on this plantation 100 acres of corn and 10 acres of indigo, 10 or 12 acres in sweet potatoes, and a rice swamp of about 50 acres. The potato and indigo had been laid by, that is, the season of working in them was past, before I came upon the estate. And we were driven hard to the overseer to get done with the cotton, to be ready to give the corn another harrowing and hoeing, before the season should be too far advanced. Most of the corn in this part of the country was already laid, but the crop here had been planted late and yet required to be worked. For those who have just joined us, you can follow along. The link is in the box if you're on social media or if you're on YouTube. We are in chapter 7 of 50 years and change, and it's just so interesting how much acreages they are working and required to work, like they often say, like animals. It says, what we'll discuss, for those who are new to this, we'll discuss our thoughts and feelings of what we read at the end of the chapter. We were supplied with an abundance of bread, for a peck of corn is as much as a man can consume in a week, if he has other vegetables with it. But we were obliged to provide ourselves with the other articles necessary for our sustenance. Nero had corn in his patch, which was now hard enough to be fit for boiling, and my friend Lydia had beans in her garden. We exchanged corn for beans and had a good supply of both, but these delicacies were obliged to reserve for supper. We took our breakfast in the field from the cart, which seldom afforded us anything better than bread and some raw vegetables from the garden. Nothing of moment occurred amongst us in this first week of my residence here. On Wednesday evening, called settlement night, 2 men and women were whipped, but circumstances of this kind were so common that I shall in future not mention them unless something extraordinary attended them. Wow. I could make wooden bowls and ladles and went to work with a man who was clearing some new land about 2 miles off on the second Sunday of my sojourn here, and applied the money I earned in purchasing the tools necessary to enable me to carry on my trade. I occupied all my leisure hours for several hours after this in making wooden trays and such other wooden vessels as were most in demand. Then I traded off in part to a storekeeper who lived about 5 miles from the plantation, and for some of my work I obtained money. Before Christmas, I had sold more than $30 worth of my manufactures, but the merchant with whom I traded charged such high prices for his good that I was poorly compensated for my Sunday toils and nightly labors. Nevertheless, by these means, I was able to keep our family supplied with molasses and some other luxuries. And at the approach of winter, I purchased 3 coarse blankets, to which Nero added as many. And we had all these made up into blanket coats for Dina, ourselves, and the children. About 10 days after my arrival, we had a great feast at the quarter. One night after we had returned from the field, the overseer sent for me by his little son, and when I came to his house, he asked me if I understood the trade of a butcher. I told him I was not a butcher by trade, but I had often assisted my master and others to kill hogs and cattle, and I and that I could dress a hog or bullock as well as most people. He then told me he was going to have a beef killed in the morning at the great house, and I must do it. That he would not spare any of his hands to go with me, but he would get one of the houseboys to help me. When the morning came, I went according to the orders to butcher the beef, which I expected to find in some enclosure of the plantation. But the overseer told me I must take a boy named Tony from the house, whose business it was to care of the cattle, and go to the woods and look for the beef. Tony and I set out sometime before sunrise and went to a cow pen about a mile from the house, where he said he had seen a young cattle only a day or two before. And this cow pen, we saw several cows waiting to be milked. I suppose for their calves were in an adjoining field and separated from them only by a fence. Tony then said we should have to go to the long savanna where the dry cattle generally range. Thither we set off. This long savanna lay at the distance of 3 miles from the cow pen. And when we reached it, I found it to be literally what it was called, a long savanna. It was a piece of low, swampy ground, several miles in extent, with an open space in the interior part of it, about a mile long, perhaps a quarter of a mile in width. It was manifest that this open space was covered with water through the greater part of the year, which prevented the growth of timber in this place, though at the time it was dry, except a pond near one end, and with covered perhaps an acre of ground. In this natural meadow, every kind of wild grass common to such places in the southern country abandoned. Here I first saw the scrub and saw grasses, the first of which is so hard and rough that is gathered to scrub coarse wooden furniture or even pewter, and the last is provided with edges somewhat like teeth, so hard and sharp that it should soon tear the skin off the legs of anyone who should venture to walk through it with his bare limbs. For those who have joined us, this is Lift Every Voice. We are still in chapter 7. I'm going to take a swig of water here as he's in the savannah looking for the cow that he's supposed to slaughter. Sorry. As we entered this savannah, we were enveloped in clouds of mosquitoes and swarms of gallinippers that threatened to devour us. As we advanced through the grass, they rose up until the air was thick and actually darkened with them. They rushed upon us with the fury of yellow jackets, whose hive has been broken in upon, and covered every part of our persons. The clothes I had on, which were nothing but a shirt and trousers of tow linen, afforded no protection even against the mosquitoes, which were much larger than those found along the Chesapeake Bay. And nothing short of a covering of leather could have defended me against the gallinippers. Not sure what insects those are. I was pierced by 1,000 stings at a time, and verily believe I could not have lived beyond a few hours in this place. Tony ran into the pond and rolled himself in the water to get rid of the persecutors, but he had not been long there before he came running out as fast as he had gone in, hollowing and clamoring in a manner wholly unintelligible to me. He was terribly frightened, but I could not imagine what could be the cause of his alarm until he reached the shore, when he turned around with his face to the water and called, "The biggest alligator in the world, did not you see him?" I told him I had not seen anything but himself in the water, but he insisted that he had been chased in the pond by an alligator, which had followed him until he was close in the shore. We waited a few minutes for the alligator to rise to the surface, but was soon compelled by the mosquitoes to quit this place. Wow. Tony said we need not look for cattle here. No cattle could live amongst these mosquitoes, and I thought he was right in his judgment. When we then proceeded into the woods and thickets, and after wandering about for an hour or more, we found the cattle, and after much difficulty, succeeded in driving a part of them back to the cow pen and enclosed them in it. I here selected the one that appeared to me to be the fattest, and securing it with ropes, we drove the animal to the place of slaughter. The beef was intended as a feast for the slaves. Huh. At the laying by the corn and cotton, and when I had hung it up and had taken the hide off, my young master, whom I had seen on the day of my arrival, came out to me and ordered me to cut off the head, neck, legs, and tail and lay them together with the empty stomach and the harslet in a basket. The basket was sent home to the kitchen of the great house by a woman and a boy who attended for that purpose. I think there were at least 120 or 120 or 30 pounds of this offal. The residence of the carcass I cut into 4 quarters, and we carried it in the cellar of the great house. Here, one of the hind quarters was salted in a tub for the use of the family, and the other was sent as a present to the planter, who lived about 4 miles distance. The two forequarters were cut in very small pieces and salted by ourselves. These, I was told, would be cooked for our dinner on the next day, Sunday, when there was to be a general rejoicing about all the slaves of the plantation. Hmm. After the beef was salted down, I received some bread and milk for my breakfast, and we went to join the hands in the cornfield, where they were harrowing and hoeing the crop for the last time. The overseer had promised us that we should have holiday after the completion of this project. Sorry, I don't know where project came from. That we should have holiday after the completion of this work. And by great exertion, we finished it about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. On our return to the quarter, the overseer at roll call, which he performed this day before night, told us that every family must send a bowl to the great house to get our dinners of meat. This intelligence diffused as much joy amongst us as if each one had drawn a prize in a lottery. What in the world? Sorry. At the assurance of a meat dinner, the old people smiled and showed their teeth and returned thanks to Master Overseer. But many of the younger ones shouted, clapped their hands, leaped, and ran about with delight. Each family or mess now sent, go ahead, Salika. Each family or mess now sent its deputy with a large wooden bowl in his hand to receive the dinner at the great kitchen. I went on the part of our family and found that meat dinner of this day was made up of the basket of tripe and other offals that I prepared in the morning. The whole had been boiled in 4 great iron kettles until the flesh had disappeared from the bones, which were broken in small pieces. A flitch of bacon, some green corn and squashed tomatoes, and onions had been added together with other condiments, and the whole converted about 100 gallons of soup, of which I received in my bowl for the use of our family more than 2 gallons. We had plenty of bread and a supply of black-eyed peas gathered from our garden, some of which Dina had boiled in our kettle, whilst I was gone for the soup, of which there was as much as we could consume, and I believe that everyone in the quarter had enough. I doubt if there was in the world a happier assemblage than ours. On this Saturday evening, we had finished one of the grand divisions of the labor of a cotton plantation, and we were supplied with dinner, which is the most of my fellow slaves appeared to be a great luxury, and most liberal donation of the part of our master, whom they regarded with sentiments of gratitude for the manifestation of his bounty, mercy. In addition to present gratification, they looked forward to the enjoyment of the next day, when they were to spend a whole Sunday in rest and banqueting. For it was known that the 2 4/4 of the bullock were to be dressed for Sunday dinner, and I had told them that each of these quarters weighed at least 100 pounds. Our quarters knew but little quiet this night. Our quarters knew but little quiet this night. Singing, playing on the banjo, and dancing occupied nearly the whole community until the daybreak, Those who were too old to take any part in our active pleasures beat time with their hands or recited stories of former times. Most of these stories refer to most of these stories refer to affairs that had been transacted in Africa and were sufficiently fraught with demons, miracles, murders to fix the attention of many hearers. To add to our happiness, the early peaches were now ripe, and the overseer permitted us to send on Sunday morning to the orchard and gather at least 10 bushels of very fine fruit. In South Carolina, they have very good summer apples, but they fall from the trees and rot immediately after they are ripe. Indeed, very often they speck rot on the trees before they become ripe. This quote unquote speck rot, as it is termed, appears to be a kind of epidemic disease amongst apples, for in some seasons whole orchards are subjected to it, and the fruit is totally worthless, while in other years the fruit in the same orchards continues sound and good until it is ripe. The climate of Carolina, however, not favorable to apples, and this fruit of so much value in the north is in the cotton region only a few weeks continents, winter apples being unknown. Every climate is congenial to the growth of some kind of fruit tree, and in Carolina and Georgia, the peach arrives at its utmost perfection. The fig also ripens well and is a delicious fruit. Let me get a little water here. It says none of our people went out. For those who have just joined us, we're on the latter part of the chapter. We only have a few more paragraphs to go, and then we're going to discuss 50 Years and Change, chapter 7. None of our people went out to work for wages today. Some few devoted a part of the morning to such work as they deemed necessary in or about their patches, and some went to the woods or the swamps to collect sticks for brooms, splits, or to gather flags for mats. But far the greater number remained at the quarter, occupied in some small work, or quietly awaiting the hour of dinner, which we had been informed by one of the house servants would be at 1 o'clock. Every family made ready some preparation of vegetables from their own garden to enlarge the quantity, if not to heighten the flavor of the dinner of this day. 1 o'clock at length arrived, but not before it had been long desired. 1 o'clock at length arrived, but not before it had been long desired, and we proceeded with our bowls a second time to the great kitchen. I acted as if I had done yesterday, the part commissioned for our family. But when we were already at the place where we are supposed to receive our soup and meat into our bowls, for it was understanding that we were with the soup to have an allowance of beef and bacon today, we were told that puddings had been boiled for us, and that we must bring dishes to receive them in. This occasioned some delay until we obtained vessels for the quarter, in addition to at least 2 gallons of soup, about a pound of beef, and a small piece of bacon. I obtained nearly 2 pounds of pudding made of cornmeal mixed with lard, boiled in large bags. This pudding with the molasses that we had at home formed a very palatable second course to our bread, soup, and vegetables. On Sunday afternoon, we had a meeting at which many of our party attended. A man named Jacob, who had come from Virginia, sang and prayed, but a great many of the people went out about the plantation in search of fruits. For there were many peach and some fig trees standing along the fences on various parts of the estate. With us, this was a day of uninterrupted happiness. And the last verse reads, a man cannot well be miserable when he sees everyone about him immersed in pleasure. Although our fare of today was not of quality to yield much gratification, yet such was the impulse given to my feelings by the universal hilarity and contentment which prevail amongst my fellows, that I forgot for the time all the subjects of grief that were stored in my memory, all the acts of wrong that had been perpetrated against me, and entered with the most sincere and earnest sentiments in the participation of the felicity of our community. That was the end of the reading of chapter 7. going forward, if we have any volunteers, feel free to, hit me up on social media. If not, I don't mind reading. It's all good. As reading and listening and going through the whole story is very interesting. So if anybody at this time would like to share what it is that they gathered from this reading, feel free to do so at this time. Anyone on the line would like to share what they gathered from reading? The mic is open. I don't hear any voices. Oh, I got a hand in the air. I have Miss B with a hand in the air. I relinquish the mic.
Yeah, I was listening. I wanted to comment on the last paragraph, and I liked the way he didn't sit there feeling sorry to the fact that he didn't get what he expected, and put aside his sense of how he was feeling and join in with the air of happiness that his fellow people in the community was engaging in. Although, it's momentary.
So he was living in the moment. He was present.
Present.
Yeah,
right.
He was present. I saw that as well. Like I said, his outlook, the way he describes his surroundings and his experience, it just allows you, even though it is what it is, and sometimes people don't understand, well, why in the world are, these quote unquote Black people, in the midst of all of this, they're able to maintain, they're able to still survive. And it's often an enigma of how is it that you're able to do this, in the face of all that you're going through. And like you said, he did sum it up in that last portion there. And throughout the way he speaks of how he chooses to look at things. Would you like to share anything else, Ms. B, at this point? I know you missed a little bit of the beginning part. It had some very interesting.
I did.
Yeah, you missed some very interesting stuff.
And that's the enigma. Although all of this is going on, they still maintain that spirit of the joy momentarily in that sense, because they know what's gonna come the next day, the long work day in the field, probably if watching other field hands get beaten, tortured.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's I think that's one of the reasons why we still standing today.
And that's the legacy. There's two sides. I agree with you that we don't want to look at, and I keep saying that we shy away from the reality, but there's two sides to the legacy. It also makes you what you are today. So what they experience for the good and the bad is what you are composed of. And so not to acknowledge one or the other is denying yourself the reality of really understanding the material that you're made of, and also understanding, further how you got in this situation, how do you get in this predicament, and by extension, how do we get out? That's the question of the millennia. How in the world do we get out of it? And to understand that, we really have to understand how we got in it. So did you want to share anything else concerning I mean, I had so many stuff. I know you missed some of the early part, but I found it.
Since I'm gonna go back and read that.
Yes.
That came in late, almost to the end.
Yeah, definitely. When you go back and read it and listen to the interaction and all I could think about was the corner stores, the interaction. Let me go back and touch it a little bit of what they said about the shopkeepers. And here it is. it says they're talking about the stores and how the slaves had to either hire themselves out on Sundays, which were their own time, because the slave masters would only give you the basics, and anything else that you needed to find a way to procure that. That's his verbiage, which I think is very interesting. And so he talks about these shopkeepers and these stores that had other things like molasses and different things that they may want, and they had to find ways of which how to get it. But this part in particular reminded me so much of I'll say it in a minute. He says the storekeepers are always ready to accommodate the slaves, who are frequently better a customer than many white people, because the former always pay cash, whilst the latter always require credit. In dealing with the slave, the shopkeeper knows he can demand whatever price he pleases for his goods without danger of being charged with extortion, and he is ready to rise at the time of night to oblige friends who are of so much value to him. Now, I'm from up north, parents are Caribbean. It's Miss B, that's my Ema, she's on the phone. And you know, we're used to corner stores, or what they would call bodegas. And 9 times out of 10, it's not it's another nation, whether it be Arabs, whether it be Italian, whether it be Puerto Rican, whoever it is, they're always in the community. And yes, they're always ready and willing to sell you their wares and their goods. And so I just thought it was interesting in that even in the time of slavery, they were, because they knew that you lacked, that you would come to their quote unquote convenience stores or their corner stores or their bodegas and get what it is that you need and pay. This is before the major department stores. This is where shopkeepers were supposed to be supplying the neighborhood with the amenities or the different things that they may need. So when I read that, I'm sorry, all I could think about was the ghetto. And all I could think about was these convenience stores who so often, you see, and you go in there when you're younger and you see the neighborhood children going back and forth with, how much is for this, Papa? Oh, let me get da da da. You understand? And he's like, yeah, just give me the money and go. So that one is something that has gone over even unto today. This whole convenience store thought and us. What do you have to say about that? I know you spent much time after you left the Caribbean up north. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, they're always making things and selling them. That's their way of sustaining themselves. And it's if you go to New York and you go in certain boroughs, you will find convenience stores with homemade, handmade things from different countries, different people having, but they're really, sometimes you'll find a convenience store in that way where a black person owns it.
Correct.
Never where you may see them more owning food shops.
Correct. Well, especially Caribbean, you see a lot of more restaurant type shops. But as it relates to these specific convenience stores, that's what came to my mind here. That the storekeeper, whether it be like I said, Arab, Spanish, Italian, whoever, they ready to accommodate you because you are their sustenance. That's why they come into your communities. That's why they come in with the hair shops. That's why they come in with the convenience stores. That's why they come in with the chicken joint, because they know that this is what you're going to support. And this was even since the time of slavery, even on to today. I just think, if somebody earlier today, I keep saying it because it's like they don't see the value in reading it, but yet still you're not understanding the very roots of the experience, that because we don't understand it, we keep reliving it without a clear view. This chapter was just so very interesting. Anyone else would like to comment? Or Miss B, feel free to comment. Like I said, I could go on and on in this chapter because it's when he talked about thinking they were going to eat the choice piece of the meat, and basically he gave them the innards. We call it tripe. You know what I mean? And I forgot what he called it, But it's like, what in the world? You know, this is where people, when they come and eating chitlins and they think it's normal, it's not normal. They gave you the leftovers. They gave, and this was supposed to be, because you've been so deprived for so long, because our foreparents were so deprived for so long, they thought it was a treat. You know, they thought this was something. They said that there was jubilation because you know, that was the last day of that specific farming expedition that they were on as it relates to the cotton. But they thought they was on cloud nine, because guess what? I'm actually eating something that's desirous to me, or it became desirous because it was different. That you know, in the Caribbean it was like they would give them the cow tail. So now oxtail is like a big food, but the reality is it's like the boniest little part of the whole thing. But the way in which they learn to cook it, you're like, yeah, man, I'm going to have some oxtail. But you understand what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
where it's our chicken foot. There's no meat on the chicken foot. This is slave food, chicken back.
Right. And it becomes, hello?
Yes, yes, the mic is yours.
No, it became part of that culture
Yes.
as generation to generation. Yeah, because back in the, you know, you used to eat the guts, the parts of that they don't want, that, as he stated, was served to them. So yeah, that becomes part of
Slave
who
food.
you now become.
Yeah.
Not that you wanted to, because you wanted the choice part of the meat, but because you had no choice
Okay.
in what you received, you had to accept. And now, from generation to generation, you keep cooking the same thing.
Correct.
And then now you said, oh, this is part of my dinner table. But
Correct.
the reality is that's not what you want to be part of your dinner table.
Correct. I agree. And so, you know, reading these things, we get a point of reference. Like you said, you were starved into thinking this was a delicacy, you know, over salted in the Caribbean. And even here, salt fish is salted beyond recognition so that it can be preserved for you to come around and try to make something of it. You know, understand? Like Miss B said, my Ima said, you're eating things like innards, you're eating things like gizzard. You know what I'm saying? You're eating things like tripe and liver. These are the entrails that you're not supposed to be consuming of animals. And this is the part where they themselves did not consume. And then we convinced ourselves that, oh, you crazy? This is the best part. So all of these things, as we're looking through the lens of history to get an understanding, all of these things should come under the microscope as they contributed to who we are today. But not everything that was needs to continue to be. As we look at the context of how we were forced into this lifestyle or these customs that later became culture and tradition. It's just very interesting. So if anyone has anything else to say at this point, feel free to do so. If not, we're going to, I tried to merge the two last week. It was a little bit of a trying time, but I usually have, I usually have Take Time to Heal tomorrow at Wednesday, but I usually have Take Time to Heal on Wednesday. Last week I tried to merge it, but I don't think those who are usual participants really understood. So I'm not sure. I might come back on Thursday and we'll do another chapter. But you can visit us on Take Time to Heal at the same number, 857-232-0156, extension 688, starting at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, of which we will discuss, you know, things that ails us, things that are holding us back as a people, and ways in which we can go beyond that. So it's definitely a group discussion, and I look forward. I'm all for group discussions because no one person has the answers. So if you understand me or know what I'm about everyone having a voice and sharing that voice so that we could come to some level of understanding. So once again, I want to thank everybody who just joined us, and thank you for spending your hour with us in taking a little part of history. If you're listening to this, share it on your social media, share it on your Facebook, your Twitter, and all of these nice things. And definitely, you know, read, volunteer to read and give voice to, at this point, Charles Ball, because the words are just the words until we read them. And that's the power of the voice and the power of speech, that right now we just experience what they were experiencing some 100+ years ago, only because we endeavored to actually give voice to the words that were on the paper. So until next time, go in peace. Shalom.